Hello wonderful people, it is Genevieve, and in this video we're going to look at how to color simple characters in Procreate. So open up the app, create a new canvas, and then start drawing. And I will be using the sketch that I've created in part 1, which was all about drawing cute animal characters, and it will be linked in the description below if you want to check it out. But you can really start with any sketch that you have of a fairly simple character at least. So this is a great technique for stuff like children's books, for example. So anyway, the first thing to do when you have your sketch is just lower the opacity of that layer so you can barely just see it on the screen. And then create a new layer that you're going to put underneath. And that's where we're going to put the main color. And so go ahead and pick the color that you want your character to be. So I'm going with a light blue here. And just like for the sketch, I am using the dry ink brush that comes with Procreate because I like the texture of it, but you can really use any brush that you are comfortable with. And at this point, all you're going to do is kind of create the outline of your character, and you're going to do the entire character. So the ears, the head, the arms, the body, and the legs. And if you have a tail, you're gonna outline that as well, just not the clothing yet. And once you have a fully closed outline, you're going to use the autofill function to color in your shape. So by just dragging the color circle in the top right corner onto your shape, it should fill it in. And this is a really good time to tweak your character a little bit. By seeing the silhouettes, sometimes you see that you want to change the shapes a little bit, so go ahead and do that. And with that shape done, you're going to create a new layer that you're going to apply as a clipping mask by tapping twice on the layer, which is going to open the layer option. And on that layer, you're going to draw kind of the secondary elements of your character. So here you can see I had some like cheeks that I wanted to have in a different color. So that's what I'm drawing. I'm also going to draw like the hair part on the top. And I'm also going to draw the inside of the ears and any other kind of detail that you want to have as like a different color, you're going to draw on that layer. But that doesn't include the clothes yet, so it's really just details on the main character itself. And you could stay on the same layer, but I like to create a new layer for the facial features. So again, a new layer, and this one you can just keep it as is because there's no need for a clipping mask since the elements are going to stay within the shape anyway. And I highly recommend that you use a color that is not like perfectly black, so either a really dark gray or a dark version of your main color, because that's going to make your piece look just more vibrant and more cohesive in the end. So when you have all the main elements of your characters colored, go ahead and create a new layer, and on this layer we're going to draw the clothes. So what I like to do for the clothes is use the harmony tool. So in the color panel, the middle option, if you set your brush to the main color of your character, so in my case the light blue, and then use the tetratic option, it's going to recommend 3 other colors that like look good just based on where they are on the color wheel. So in that way, that's kind of a shortcut in picking colors for your clothes that you know are going to work well with your character without having to try a bunch of things. So that's really something I would definitely recommend, especially if you're just starting illustration, or even if you're a pro, you just, don't have time to waste on picking colors. That's a tool that does it for you. And just like you did for the main character, go ahead and create a new layer and apply it as a clipping mask on your main coat layer. And on this layer, you're just going to add some elements to make your clothing just more interesting. So color blocks, patterns, just cool designs, that's where you do it. But don't worry about shadows, lights, or textures just yet, because that's going to be what we take care of in the next step. Once you have all your elements ready, you're going to go ahead and group your layers. So in Procreate, you just swipe them towards the right and then create a group, which you're going to rename to layers. Just to be extra cautious, I like to duplicate this group, so swiping it towards the left and then duplicate it, because the next step we're going to do is we're going to flatten the group, so combine all the layers together, and then create a new layer on top of that we're going to rename to shadows, and we're going to change the blending mode of this layer to linear burn, and then lower the opacity, and you're going to pick a color that is kind of gray, but that has a tint to it. So in this case, you can see here, I went with a gray that had just a tiny little bit of purple. And one thing I forgot, you're going to create a clipping mask with this layer as well. And you're just going to draw some shadows in a very easy way with the same brush that we've been using since the start. And what I like to do for shadows in this case, especially for super simple characters or characters that I'm going to draw a lot in like books or stuff like that, I want to keep the shadows, the lights, and the texture very simple. And that's kind of an art within itself, to know like where to put shadows so that it is interesting, but only drawing the essential shadows. So I don't know if that makes a whole lot of sense what I'm saying right now, but basically try to just make sure that you're drawing the shadows that are essential and no more than that. So the shadows kind of below the head, the shadows between the arms and the body, the shadows on the ears and the tail if your character has a tail, and then the shadow that the clothing item is going to cast on the body. And that's pretty much it. I don't even draw a shadow on the actual face or anything like that. I just keep it as is. When you have your simple shadows, you're going to create a new layer, and this one you're going to rename to lights, because it's going to be, you guessed it, for the lights. And this one right away we're going to set as a clipping mask, and we're going to change the blending mode to add, and we're going to lower the opacity as well. And for the lights, I like going with a really super bright yellow. And just like for the shadows, you're going to keep them very simple and minimal. So pretty much on the opposing side of the shadow, you're going to draw lights. And I like to draw them kind of on the edges of the character, because it makes it feel like the light is coming from the side and slightly behind, and it makes the character pop from the background if there's a background. But if there's no background, it just makes the character look just a bit more dramatic, basically. And one trick that I've learned by drawing a lot of books is it looks good when you blend either the light or the shadows, not both. So using the smudge tool, I usually tend to blend in the shadows, or the lights, I mean. So as you can see here, I'm just going really quickly over the light so that there's no hard edges created by the light. It just feels softer and kind of wraps around the character. But I do keep my shadows hard and like with really clean and clear edges, because it makes the piece, it just gives more dimension and also more contrast to the piece, which is a very important thing, especially when you have like a super simple character just like this. Speaking of adding dimension, one other trick that I've learned by coloring just a bunch of children's books is creating a layer on top of everything and setting it to soft light, and then picking a really saturated color that kind of matches the shadow. So in this case, you see I went with like a bright, dark blue purple color, and adding it on top of one side of the character. So keeping it like on the lower right part of the character. And that kind of mimics what the environment would like reflect on the character, basically. It just makes the character feel less isolated and more like in an environment. And then I do the same thing, staying on the main layer, but with like a bright yellow-orange color and on the top left part of my character. So at this point, really don't be scared of using colors that are saturated, because what you want is adding some color variation and just some warmth or a cold to your character. And these colors that you would pick, it would really depend on the environment, but since we're just drawing a character that is on a white background in this case, you can go with, a normal yellow and just a dark blue for the shadows. But if you were drawing a character that was in a jungle, for example, instead of a dark blue, you would probably go with a dark green, and instead of the light yellow orange, you would probably go with like a bright lemon color. So playing with that, a layer with bright saturated color that you set to soft light on top of everything just really help giving more life to your piece in a very quick way. So that's definitely a trick that I would recommend. And the last thing we're going to do, or second to last thing we're going to do, is create a new layer on top of everything that you're going to rename to lines. And on this layer, you're going to draw some lines to kind of indicate parts of your character that are meant to be separated, but that you couldn't separate with a shadow. So instead of drawing a full-on outline, so like a line art around your character, that's another trick that you could do to save time when you have a lot of characters to draw, but it also looks really cool. I mean, it is a style within itself to just have very minimal lines. So you can see here, I'm drawing it to separate the legs from the body, as well as the head from the neck, and the arm from the side of the body. But I really try to keep the lines minimal, and I have them kind of match the color of the section. So I'm not going in with like full black lines. It's really just slightly darker versions of the colors that are in that area. And the last step is to add a little bit more texture. So go ahead and create a new layer on top of everything that you're going to rename to extra, and you're going to change the blending mode to linear burn and lowering the opacity around 40%. And just pick the general color of your character and go around and add just groups of 2 or 3 little lines. That's going to kind of mimic the texture of fur on your character. And you can also add a little bit of texture on the clothes as well. So, lines on the shirt and just kind of a feel of fabric. Just doing a few simple lines can make a really big difference. So yeah, this was how to color simple characters in Procreate. I hope you enjoyed this tutorial, and if you did, make sure to give it a thumbs up because it really does help the channel, and I would love to see what you guys create. So feel free to share the results with me either on Facebook, Instagram, or Twitter. And last but not least, don't forget to subscribe because I put out new videos every week.